My uncle slid the manila folder across his mahogany desk and gave me the smile he'd been using since I was 10 years old, the one that said he knew better than me about everything. I know you've been asking about the trust, Adriana. With your 40th birthday coming up, I wanted to give you a realistic picture of what to expect when you take control. I sat in the leather chair across from him, my hands folded in my lap, letting him think I was the same grateful niece who'd believed every word he'd said for 28 years. The market's been tough, Uncle Richard continued, opening the folder with theatrical concern. Your father would be disappointed, but we've had some significant losses over the years. Real estate downturn in 2008, tech bubble burst, COVID volatility. I've done my best to preserve capital, but he turned the portfolio summary toward me. One number stood out in bold: $8,247,392.
About 8 million left, he said with a sigh that sounded rehearsed.
I know that's not what you were hoping for, but given the economic headwinds we've faced, I looked at that number and felt something cold settle in my chest. My name is Adriana Sterling. I'm 38 years old. I work as a managing director at Whitmore Capital Management in Manhattan, where I oversee high net worth client portfolios totaling approximately $4.2 billion. I know exactly what a $25 million trust fund invested in 1996 should be worth today. And it's not $8 million, Uncle Richard, I said quietly, my voice steady, even though my pulse was hammering. Can I see the full transaction history? All 28 years? His smile faltered, just for a second. Of course, though it's quite extensive, hundreds of pages. I can have my assistant prepare a summary. I'd like the full records, every transaction, every fee, every investment decision. I'm happy to wait while you pull them. Adriana, I'm not sure you understand how complex trust management is. There are tax considerations, regulatory filings, rebalancing strategies. I manage 42 family trusts at Whitmore, I interrupted gently. Total value approximately $1.8 billion. I'm quite familiar with trust management complexity. I'd still like to see the full transaction history. Uncle Richard leaned back in his chair. The smile was completely gone now. I'm the trustee. Your father appointed me because he trusted my judgment. I don't appreciate you questioning. I'm not questioning anything. I'm requesting documentation that I'm legally entitled to review. Connecticut trust law requires trustees to provide complete accounting to beneficiaries upon request. Would you like me to cite the specific statute? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I'll have the records prepared, he finally said. It may take a few days. That's fine. I'll wait. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and gave him the same polite smile I used with difficult clients. Thank you for your time, Uncle Richard. I'll expect the full documentation by Friday. I walked out of his office in the house where I'd spent countless childhood weekends, where he and Aunt Patricia had hosted my 16th birthday party, where he'd given me away at my wedding because my father wasn't there to do it. The house my father's trust money had helped him buy. I got in my car, drove exactly 3 blocks, pulled into a Starbucks parking lot, and sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel. $8 million. A $25 million trust fund invested in 1996 during one of the longest bull markets in American history should be worth a minimum of $80 million today. Even with the 2008 crash, even with COVID, even with every market correction and downturn. The S&P 500 had returned an average of 10.7% annually over the past 28 years. Conservative portfolio allocation, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, should have delivered at least 8% annual returns. I pulled out my phone and opened the compound interest calculator I used for client projections. Principal, $25,000. Annual return, 8%. Time period, 28 years. Result, $84,293,472. Even at a conservative 7% return, $72,418,239. At the market average of 10.7%, $127,984,521. Uncle Richard was showing me $8.2 million. Someone had stolen approximately $75 million from my inheritance. And I was sitting across from him in his office, looking at his expensive artwork and his custom furniture and his view of Long Island Sound, knowing exactly who that someone was. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. How did the meeting with Richard go? Is everything okay with the trust? I stared at that message for a long time. My mother, who'd been widowed at 32 when my father died of a sudden heart attack, leaving her with a 10-year-old daughter and a mountain of grief, who'd remarried badly, divorced worse, and spent the last 28 years working as an elementary school teacher because my father's life insurance had barely covered the funeral and mortgage. Who could have used that trust money? Who'd watched me grow up on scholarships and student loans, while Uncle Richard, my father's own brother, managed the trust that was supposed to secure my future? Who'd never questioned Richard's management because he was family, because my father had trusted him, because Richard was so good with money and taking care of everything. I typed back, meeting went fine. Can we talk tonight? Then I opened my work email and sent a message to my assistant. James, I need to take personal time starting tomorrow. Family matter. Please reschedule my client meetings for next week. I'll be reachable by phone for emergencies only. His response came immediately. Of course. Everything all right? We'll be soon, I typed back, but then I called the one person I knew could help me. Sterling and Associates Law, this is Veronica. Veronica, it's Adriana. Is my cousin available? Miss Sterling. Let me check. Yes, she just finished a client call. One moment. My cousin Lauren came on the line 30 seconds later. Adriana? This is a nice surprise. What's up? Lauren, I need a lawyer, trusts and estates, fiduciary fraud, and I need someone who isn't afraid to sue family. The pause on the other end told me she understood immediately. Your trust fund. Your dad's brother Richard is the trustee. Was the trustee, as of about 20 minutes ago when he told me my $25 million inheritance is now worth $8 million and couldn't explain where the other $77 million went. Jesus Christ. Lauren's voice shifted into the sharp focus I'd heard her use in courtrooms. Adriana, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let him know you're suspicious beyond normal beneficiary diligence. Can you get the transaction records? I requested full documentation. He's preparing it. Should have it Friday. Good. When you get it, don't review it yourself. Bring it straight to me. We need a forensic accountant to go through this, and we need to establish a paper trail showing you requested information through proper channels before we make any accusations. Lauren, I work in portfolio management. I can review. You're too close to this. You need objective third-party analysis. And Adriana, if this is what I think it is, if Richard's been stealing from your trust for 28 years, we're looking at potential criminal charges, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. This isn't just a civil matter. I closed my eyes. He's my father's brother. He's a trustee who appears to have stolen $77 million from his dead brother's daughter. Family stops mattering when someone commits felonies against you. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot and let myself feel it, all of it. The grief, the rage, the sick understanding that the man who'd tucked me into bed when I stayed at his house as a child, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd cried at my father's funeral and promised to take care of me, that man had been systematically stealing my inheritance since I was 10 years old. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I pulled up my personal financial records and started doing what I do professionally, following the money. My father, David Sterling, had been a successful commercial real estate developer. When he died in 1996, his estate was valued at approximately $30 million. The bulk of that, $25 million, went into an irrevocable trust for me, with Richard appointed as trustee until I turned 40. I'd received an allowance from the trust since I turned 18, started at $2,000 a month for college expenses, increased to $5,000 a month after graduation, currently $8,000 monthly, 20 years of allowances, approximately $1.2 million total. That left $23.8 million that should have been invested and growing. I opened my laptop and started pulling public records. Richard Sterling, age 67, owned a $6.5 million house in Greenwich. drove a Bentley, belonged to 3 country clubs. His wife Patricia wore jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. Richard had been a mid-level investment advisor when my father died. Decent income, comfortable life, but nothing spectacular. Now he lived like old money. I pulled his company records. Sterling Financial Advisors, LLC, founded 1997, 1 year after my father died. Initial capitalization, $500,000, cero cero. Where does a mid-level advisor get $500,000 to start a company right after his brother dies? I kept digging. Sterling Financial Advisors had made several investments over the years. A strip mall development in 2003, a tech startup in 2007, a medical device company in 2012, a cryptocurrency fund in 2018. Every single one had failed. Total losses documented in public filings approximately $8 million. But the company was still operating, still had offices, still paid Richard a salary that supported his lifestyle. I pulled the corporate ownership records. Sterling Financial Advisors LLC had one major investor, the David Sterling Irrevocable Trust, my trust. My father's money had capitalized Uncle Richard's business, and every failed investment his company had made, every strip mall that went bankrupt, every tech startup that folded, every cryptocurrency that crashed, had been funded with my inheritance. The rage that hit me then was physical. I had to grip the steering wheel to stop my hands from shaking. He'd used my father's money to start a business, used my trust fund as his personal investment vehicle, and when his investments failed because he was a mediocre advisor making terrible decisions, he'd just taken more money from the trust to cover the losses for 28 years. My phone rang, unknown number. Miss Sterling? This is Detective Morrison with the Greenwich Police Department. We received a report about a potential incident at 247 Riverside Drive. Is everything all right? My uncle's address. I'm fine, Detective. I was just visiting my uncle, Richard Sterling. There's no incident. He called to report you were behaving erratically and he was concerned for your safety. Said you seemed unstable when you left his office. I laughed. Actual, genuine laughter. Detective. I'm a managing director at Whitmore Capital Management. I manage $4.2 billion in client assets. I visited my uncle to request documentation about my family trust, which I'm legally entitled to review. I left his office calmly and drove away. I'm currently sitting in a Starbucks parking lot. Would you like me to send you my location?
A pause. That won't be necessary, Miss Sterling. I apologize for the interruption.
Detective, one more thing. My Uncle Richard is the trustee of my father's trust. I'm entitled to request full accounting records. Connecticut law, right? I'm not familiar with trust law, ma'am. That's a civil matter. Of course, thank you for checking on me. After I hung up, I took a screenshot of the call log showing Uncle Richard's number had called the police department 3 minutes after I left his office. He was scared. Good. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment in Tribeca, the apartment I'd bought with my own salary because I'd never wanted to rely on trust money, and made a list. Everything I knew, everything I could prove, everything I needed to find out. My father had died when I was 10, heart attack, sudden, devastating. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't, and my childhood ended in a hospital waiting room, while doctors used words like massive coronary event and nothing we could do. Uncle Richard had stepped in immediately, handled the funeral arrangements, managed the estate, set up the trust, promised my mother he'd take care of everything so she could focus on raising me. And she'd let him because he was family, because my father had trusted him, because she was drowning in grief and didn't have the energy to question the brother of the man she'd lost. Richard had controlled my inheritance for 28 years. 28 years of investment decisions I'd never questioned because I'd been a child, then a teenager, then a young professional building my own career. I'd assumed he was doing his job, assumed the trust was fine, assumed my father's money was safe with his brother. I'd been spectacularly wrong. My laptop pinged. An email from Lauren. Adriana spoke with forensic accountant I trust. Martin Reeves, former FBI financial crimes investigator, he can start review immediately once you get the records. Also spoke with probate attorney. Here's what you need to know. 1. Trustee has fiduciary duty =, highest legal standard of care. 2. Self-dealing using trust assets for personal benefit =, automatic breach. 3. Statute of limitations doesn't apply if fraud was concealed. 4. You can petition court to remove trustee and freeze assets. 5. Criminal charges possible if theft proven. Get those records. Don't tip your hand. We move fast once we have evidence. In alley. Friday came, no records from Uncle Richard. I called his office. Hi, this is Adriana Sterling calling for Richard. I'm sorry, Miss Sterling. Mr. Sterling is out of the office until Monday. Can I take a message? I was expecting to receive trust documentation today. Can you check if he left it for me? I don't see anything here. Let me leave him a message to call you. He was stalling. I sent a formal email copying Lauren. Uncle Richard, per full our meeting on Tuesday, I requested complete transaction records for the David Sterling Irrevocable Trust. You indicated these would be available by Friday. Please provide the documentation at your earliest convenience or advise when it will be ready. As you know, Connecticut General Statutes, Section 45A 541 requires trustees to provide complete accounting to beneficiaries upon request. I appreciate your prompt attention to this matter. Best regards, Adriana Sterling. His response came 3 hours later. Adriana, the records are quite extensive and require proper organization. My attorney has advised me that given your hostile tone and apparent distrust, all future communication regarding the trust should go through legal counsel. You will receive the documentation within the time frame required by law, accompanied by a full explanation of my management decisions over the past 28 years. I'm disappointed that you would question my stewardship of your father's legacy.
Richard.
I forwarded it to Lauren with one word, hostile. Her response, he's lawyered up. Good. That means he knows he's exposed. File petition to compel production of records on Monday. Also, filing motion to freeze trust assets pending review. He's going to try to move money before you can prove theft. Monday morning, I took personal leave from work, told my boss I had a family emergency, didn't specify that the emergency was discovering my uncle had embezzled my inheritance. Lauren filed 2 motions in Connecticut probate court, one compelling immediate production of all trust records, the second freezing trust assets and suspending Richard's authority as trustee pending investigation. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday. Tuesday night, my mother called. Adriana, Richard called me today. He's very upset. He says you're accusing him of stealing from the trust. Honey, what's going on? I closed my eyes. Mom, can you come to my apartment tomorrow? I need to show you something. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry, but I need you to see this in person. She arrived the next morning with that worried expression mothers get when they know something is deeply wrong but don't want to name it. I made coffee, sat her down at my kitchen table, and showed her the numbers. The trust started with $25 million in 1996. I began, that money should have grown to at least $80 million by now. Conservative estimate, Richard told me last week, it's worth $8 million. My mother's face went white. 8 million? That can't be right. It's not right. Mom, I think Uncle Richard has been stealing from my trust for 28 years. No. Adriana, no. He's family. He loved your father. He wouldn't. I showed her the corporate records, Sterling Financial Advisors, the failed investments, the business capitalized with trust money, the lifestyle he maintained despite running a company that lost millions. He used Dad's money to start his business, I said quietly. Every time one of his investments failed, he took more from the trust to cover it. For 28 years, Mom. While you worked as a teacher, while I took out student loans, while we lived carefully because we thought we had to. She started crying, silent tears running down her face. Your father trusted him, she whispered. David made Richard the trustee because he was his brother. We both thought Richard would protect you. He protected himself with my inheritance. What do? We go to court, we get the records, We prove what he did, and Mom, I reached across the table and took her hand. We make sure he can never do this to anyone else. The probate court hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Lauren met me outside the courthouse at 1:45. Richard's attorney is here. Wallace Thornton. Big firm, expensive. Your uncle's taking this seriously. Good. So am I? We walked into the courtroom. Uncle Richard sat at the defense table with his attorney, looking distinguished and concerned. When he saw me, he stood up. Adriana, please. Can we talk about this privately? We're family. We shouldn't be doing this in court. I sat down at the plaintiff's table without responding. Judge Patricia Reeves called the hearing to order. This is a petition to compel production of trust records and freeze trust assets pending review. Miss Hastings, you're representing the beneficiary? Lauren stood, yes, Your Honor. Adriana Sterling, sole beneficiary of the David Sterling Irrevocable Trust, established in 1996. The trustee, Richard Sterling, has failed to provide complete accounting records despite repeated requests. Given the significant discrepancy between expected and reported trust value, we're requesting immediate document production and asset freeze. Wallace Thornton stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is a vindictive action by a beneficiary who doesn't understand trust management. Mr. Sterling has served as trustee for 28 years without complaint. The market has been volatile. Some investments didn't perform as expected. That's not fraud, it's reality. Miss Sterling has no evidence of wrongdoing. Judge Reeves looked at me. Miss Sterling, you're a layperson reviewing trust management decisions. What makes you think there's a problem? I stood up. Lauren touched my arm. She wanted to handle this, but I'd been silent long enough. Your Honor, I'm a managing director at Whitmore Capital Management. I oversee $4.2 billion in high net worth client portfolios, including 42 family trusts. I'm not a layperson. I'm a professional portfolio manager who knows exactly what a $25 million trust should be worth after 28 years of market growth. Judge Reeves's eyebrows went up. Go on. A conservative 60/40 portfolio allocation should have returned at least 8% annually over that period. That's $84 million. Even accounting for fees, taxes, and the allowances I've received, the trust should be worth approximately $70 million. My uncle reports $8.2 million. That's a $62 million discrepancy. I want to know where my father's money went. Thornton tried to interrupt. Your Honor, I'm not finished, I said. I also discovered that my trust fund was used to capitalize my uncle's business, Sterling Financial Advisors, in 1997. That's self-dealing. It's a direct breach of fiduciary duty, and every failed investment his company made, strip malls, tech startups, cryptocurrency funds, was funded with my inheritance. The courtroom went silent. Judge Reeves looked at Richard. Mr. Sterling, did you use trust assets to fund your business? Your Honor, I made legitimate investment decisions. Did you use trust assets to capitalize Sterling Financial Advisors? Richard's attorney whispered urgently in his ear.
Yes.
It was an investment opportunity. The trust benefited from a company that lost $8 million on failed ventures. I didn't shout, didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Judge Reeves set down her pen. Mr. Thornton, your client just admitted to self-dealing. That's an automatic breach of fiduciary duty. Your Honor, we're prepared to provide full documentation showing. You should have provided full documentation when the beneficiary requested it a week ago. Instead, your client hired an attorney and stalled. Judge Reeves looked at the court reporter. Order compelling immediate production of all trust records. All documents to be provided to petitioner's counsel within 48 hours. Trust assets are frozen effective immediately. Mr. Sterling's authority as trustee is suspended pending forensic review. This court will appoint a temporary trustee to manage assets during investigation. Your Honor, that's unnecessary. Mr. Thornton, your client admitted in open court to using trust funds for personal business ventures. That's prima facie evidence of breach. If you want to challenge this order, file an appeal. Hearing adjourned. The gavel came down. Uncle Richard turned to look at me. For the first time in 28 years, I didn't see the loving uncle who'd protected me after my father died. I saw a man who'd stolen from a child and gotten caught. The records arrived on Friday afternoon via courier, not from Uncle Richard directly, from his attorney's office. 12 boxes. Literally 12 bankers' boxes full of paper documents, transaction records, and investment statements covering 28 years. The delivery guy wheeled them into Lauren's conference room on a dolly. "Someone's in trouble," he said cheerfully, completely unaware he was delivering evidence of a multi-million-dollar embezzlement. Lauren, her paralegal Marcus, and I stood looking at the boxes like they were evidence of a crime, which technically they were. "This is deliberate," Lauren said, picking up a random file. "He dumped everything with no organization. Wants to bury us in paper so we can't find the smoking gun." "He doesn't know who he's dealing with," I said, pulling out my phone. "I analyze complex portfolios for a living. This is literally what I do." I called Martin Reeves, the forensic accountant Lauren had recommended, former FBI financial crimes investigator, now a consultant who specialized in tracking stolen money. He arrived an hour later, mid-50s, gray hair, the kind of calm competence that comes from spending 20 years following paper trails that criminals thought they'd hidden. "Miss Sterling," he said, shaking my hand, "Lauren's filled me in. 25 million trust, should be 80 million. Trustee reporting 8 million. Where do you want to start?" "1996, I said, the year my father died. I want to see every transaction from the beginning." We worked through the weekend. Lauren's conference room became command central, documents spread across the table, organized chronologically. Martin brought portable scanners. We digitized everything, built a database, cross-referenced transactions. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. The trust had started with $25 million in November 1996, 1 month after my father's death. The initial investment allocation looked reasonable: 60% large cap stocks, 30% bonds, 10% cash reserves. Standard conservative portfolio for a minor's trust. But in January 1997, 3 months after my father died, the first irregularity appeared. A $500,000 withdrawal labeled Investment Opportunity Sterling Financial Advisors. My father's money, funding Richard's new business. Then, in March 1997, another $200,000, Operating Capital SFA. June 1997, $150,000. Business Expansion SFA. By the end of 1997, Richard had withdrawn $1.2 million from my trust to capitalize his company. "This is textbook self-dealing," Martin said, highlighting the transactions on his laptop. "Trustee, using trust assets for personal benefit. Every state has laws against this. It's one of the most basic fiduciary violations." "Keep going," I said. 1998. The trust made an investment in something called Riverside Commons LLC, a strip mall development in Stamford, amount $2.5 million. I pulled the corporate records. Riverside Commons LLC, managing partner Richard Sterling. He'd invested my money in his own real estate deal. The strip mall opened in 2000. By 2003, it was in bankruptcy. Total loss, $2.5 million. "Did the trust recover anything from the bankruptcy?" I asked. Martin scanned through the records. Nothing. Listed as total loss. "How is that possible? Real estate doesn't just vanish. The property had value." "Look at the bankruptcy filing," Marcus said, pulling up public records on his tablet. "The property was sold to satisfy creditor claims. The primary creditor was Sterling Financial Advisors." I stared at the screen. He made my trust invest in his project. When it failed, his company got paid first in bankruptcy. My trust got nothing.
That's fraud, Lauren said quietly.
"That's actual criminal fraud." We kept digging. 2001, $1.8 million investment in Tech Venture Partners Fund, a technology startup incubator. I pulled the fund documents. General partner, Richard Sterling. The fund invested in 6 companies between 2001 and 2005. All 6 failed. Total loss, $1.8 million. 2007, $3.2 million investment in Med Device Innovations, Inc., a medical device company developing some kind of surgical instrument. Corporate records showed Richard on the board of directors. The company burned through the money in 18 months, never brought a product to market, dissolved in 2009. Total loss, signo de dollar 3.2 million. 2012, $2.1 million in Global Commodities Fund. Richard was listed as an advisor. The fund bet heavily on gold and oil. Both positions went underwater. The fund collapsed in 2014. Total loss, signo de dollar 2.1 million. 2018, $1.7 million in crypto growth investment partners. I actually laughed when I saw that one. He put almost 2 million of my money into cryptocurrency. Not just cryptocurrency, Martin said, scanning the prospectus, specifically into something called Bit Diamond. Ever heard of it? No, because it doesn't exist anymore. It was a scam coin that collapsed in 2019. Total loss, signo de dollar, 1.7 million. Martin pulled up a spreadsheet. Let me show you something. He'd categorized every investment Richard had made with trust assets over 28 years, color-coded by type. Green legitimate diversified index funds and blue chip stocks. These had performed exactly as expected, good returns, steady growth. Red Richard's personal ventures and affiliated investments. Every single one had lost money. The spreadsheet was mostly red. Total invested in legitimate assets. $8.4 million, Martin said. Current value, $22.7 million. That's a 170% return, right in line with market performance. Total invested in Richard's ventures, $16.6 million. Current value, 0. Total loss. I stared at the numbers. He took 2/3 of my trust and gambled it on his own failed businesses. Not gambled, Martin corrected. Stole. Every one of these investments benefited him personally. Strip mall he owned, tech fund he managed, medical device company where he sat on the board, commodities fund where he collected advisor fees, cryptocurrency fund he created. He was using my inheritance as his personal venture capital fund. Yes, and every time something failed, he took more money from the legitimate investments to cover the loss and maintain his lifestyle. Lauren was taking notes, her pen moving fast across the legal pad. This is felony embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, securities fraud, wire fraud, if any transactions crossed state lines. Martin, how much total has he stolen? Martin pulled up another tab. Let me walk you through the math. He projected his screen onto the conference room wall. Original trust value, $25 million, November 1996. Conservative 8% annual return over 28 years, $84.2 million. Minus allowances paid to beneficiary, $1.2 million. Minus reasonable trustee fees at 1% annually, $4.8 million. Expected current value, $78.2 million. Actual current value, $8.2 million. Estimated embezzlement, $70 million. The number hung in the air like an accusation. $70 million. My father's money. The inheritance he'd left to secure my future. Stolen by his own brother. Can we prove intent? Lauren asked. Defense is going to argue these were legitimate investment decisions that didn't work out. Bad judgment, not fraud.
Watch this.
Martin said. He pulled up Richard's personal financial records. We'd subpoenaed them through the court order. Richard's lifestyle expenses over 28 years, $12.4 million. His documented income from Sterling Financial Advisors, $3.8 million. Where did the other $8.5 million come from? I asked. Trustee fees, Martin said. Look at what he charged the trust. Year 1, $50,000 in trustee fees. Reasonable for a $25 million trust. Year 5, $125,000. Getting high, but potentially defensible. Year 10, $280,000. Excessive. Year 20, $520,000. Absolutely criminal. He increased his fees every year, I said slowly, even as the trust value was dropping because of his bad investments. Not just increased, Martin said. Look at the fee structure. He charged a percentage of assets under management, but he valued the assets based on his own appraisals, not market value. He was inflating the trust value on paper to justify higher fees. Marcus whistled. That's fraud on top of fraud. It gets worse, Martin continued. Look at the expenses he charged back to the trust. I scanned the list: office rent for Sterling financial advisors, equipment, staff salaries, marketing, travel. He ran his entire business on trust money, I said, charged every expense back to my father's estate. For 28 years, Martin confirmed, the trust essentially funded his company while he lost your inheritance on bad investments. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Adriana, Uncle Richard's voice. He sounded exhausted. We need to talk. Through attorneys only, that's what you wanted. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I can explain everything. I looked at Lauren. She shook her head. No. I put the call on speaker anyway. You're on speaker, Uncle Richard. My attorney is here. So is the forensic accountant reviewing the trust records you finally provided. Talk. A long pause. I made mistakes. Some of the investments didn't work out the way I planned, but I was trying to grow the trust. I was trying to do right by you. You invested $16.6 million of my money in your own businesses, all of which failed. That's not mistakes. That's theft. I had to capitalize the business somehow. Your father would have wanted me to succeed. My father left $25 million to secure my future, not fund your business ventures. Adriana, please. I'm family. We can work this out. I'll make it right. I'll pay you back over time. You stole $70 million over 28 years. You used my childhood inheritance to buy a mansion and a Bentley while my mother worked as a teacher. You charged $500,000 a year in trustee fees while losing my money on cryptocurrency scams. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Uncle Richard? Explain the fee inflation. Explain charging your business expenses to my trust. Explain the strip mall where your company was the primary creditor and my trust lost everything. Silence. I didn't call to argue, he finally said. I called to offer a settlement. I'll transfer assets, sign over properties. We can resolve this privately without criminal charges. What criminal charges? I asked innocently. Another pause. Longer this time. You wouldn't, Adriana. I'm your father's brother. I gave you away at your wedding. Think about your aunt, your cousins. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about how my aunt Patricia wore $200,000 in jewelry to that wedding, jewelry bought with my inheritance. I'm thinking about how my cousins went to private schools and drove luxury cars while I took out student loans. I'm thinking about 28 years of theft disguised as family love. You're making a mistake. The mistake was trusting you. We're done talking. If you want to settle, submit an offer through your attorney, and Uncle Richard, start liquidating assets because you're going to need approximately $70 million. I hung up. Lauren was grinning. That was either brilliant or incredibly stupid. He's scared, I said. He knows what we found. He knows he's exposed. He's also going to start moving money, Marcus warned, hiding assets, transferring property to family members. We need to act fast. Already on it, Lauren said, typing on her laptop. Filing motion tomorrow to freeze all of Richard's personal assets, not just the trust. And I'm notifying the Connecticut Attorney General's office. This is beyond civil litigation. This is criminal embezzlement. That night, my mother came to my apartment. I've been thinking about the money, she said quietly, about what we could have done with it when you were 10, when you needed braces and I had to work overtime to afford them, when you got into Cornell and we had to choose the state school because of cost, when I had to refinance the house to pay for your grandmother's nursing home. Mom, Richard knew. He knew we were struggling. He'd come over for Sunday dinners and see us counting pennies. And he never said a word, never offered to help, never mentioned that your father's trust fund could have paid for all of it. She wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. I kept thinking he was doing his best, she continued. That trust management was hard, that the market was unpredictable. I never questioned him because he was David's brother, because David loved him, because family is supposed to protect family. He chose himself over us, I said. He chose himself over his own brother's child. David died trusting Richard to take care of you, and Richard stole from you for 28 years. We sat in silence for a while. What happens now? She asked. Now we show the evidence to the Attorney General. We file criminal charges, we recover as much as we can, and we make sure Richard Sterling never manages anyone's money again. The Connecticut Attorney General's office called on Monday. Miss Sterling, this is Assistant Attorney General Catherine Morrison. I've reviewed the materials your attorney forwarded. I'd like to meet with you and the forensic accountant this week. We met on Wednesday in a conference room that smelled like old case files and strong coffee. Catherine Morrison was mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of prosecutor who'd built her career on white-collar crime cases. She listened to Martin's presentation for 2 hours without interrupting. When he finished, she set down her pen. This is one of the most clear-cut embezzlement cases I've seen in 15 years. Trustee self-dealing, fraudulent fee inflation, misappropriation of assets for personal use. The documentation is excellent. Are you taking the case? Lauren asked. I'm convening a grand jury. Based on this evidence, I believe we have probable cause for criminal charges. First-degree larceny, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, wire fraud, and securities fraud. Combined potential sentence 15 to 20 years. I felt something loosen in my chest. Validation, justice, proof that I wasn't crazy or vindictive or wrong. There's something else, Catherine said. In cases like this, the embezzlement is rarely isolated. If Richard Sterling was this brazen with your trust, he may have done this to other clients. He manages other people's money? I asked. Sterling Financial Advisors has 43 active clients. Most are family trusts, estates, retirement accounts. If he used the same playbook investing client money in his own ventures, charging excessive fees, hiding losses, we could be looking at a much larger fraud scheme. How do we find out? Subpoena his client records, audit every account, see if there's a pattern. The subpoena went out that afternoon. Richard's attorney filed an emergency motion to quash it, claimed attorney-client privilege, invasion of privacy, fishing expedition. The judge denied the motion in 48 hours. The state has provided substantial evidence of criminal activity. Subpoena is valid. Mr. Sterling's client records will be produced within 7 days. Those 7 days felt like 7 years. I kept working, went through the motions at Whitmore Capital, managed client portfolios, attended meetings, but my mind was elsewhere, playing out scenarios. What if Richard had destroyed evidence? What if he'd hidden money in offshore accounts we couldn't trace? What if his other clients were part of the scam, not victims? The records arrived on a Thursday. Catherine Morrison called me that night. Adriana, you need to sit down. I'm already sitting. We found 12 other victims, 12 families whose trusts Richard managed. Every single one shows the same pattern: self-dealing, excessive fees, lost investments in his ventures, total estimated theft, $47 million.
I close my eyes.
47 million on top of my 70 million. Total fraud, $117 million. 28 years, 55 families affected. This is the largest trust embezzlement case in Connecticut history. Jesus Christ. There's more. One of the trusts was for a disabled veteran. Richard was appointed by the probate court to manage the VA benefits and settlement money. He stole $3.2 million from a man with traumatic brain injury who couldn't advocate for himself. I felt sick. Another trust was for siblings who lost both parents in a car accident, ages 6 and 8 when the trust was established. Richard charged them $80,000 a year in fees, while their trust value dropped from $4 million to $600,000. Why didn't anyone catch this? Because he was good at hiding it. Different accounting firms for different clients staggered his theft so no single account showed catastrophic loss, relied on beneficiaries, not understanding finance, counted on family loyalty, keeping people quiet. What happens now? Now I arrest Richard Sterling. They arrested Uncle Richard on a Tuesday morning at his office in Greenwich. I wasn't there. Catherine Morrison thought it would be better if I stayed away, but the news footage showed him being led out in handcuffs while his employees watched in shock. The headline on the Connecticut Post, prominent financial advisor arrested in $117 million trust embezzlement scheme. By evening, it was national news. My phone exploded with calls. Reporters, former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years, distant relatives suddenly very concerned about my well-being. I ignored all of them except one. Miss Sterling, this is Barbara Kendrick. You don't know me, but Richard Sterling was the trustee for my daughter's trust after my husband and I died in 2008. My breath caught. You're calling from... I'm not dead, she said with a dry laugh. The accident report was wrong. I survived. Severe injuries, long recovery. But when I finally got my life back together and tried to check on my daughter's money, Richard told me the trust was nearly empty. Market losses, he said. I believed him because I was too broken to fight. How much did he take? 3.4 million? My husband's life insurance, the wrongful death settlement from the truck driver who hit us, everything we'd saved to make sure Emma and Sophie would be okay. I closed my eyes. How old are your daughters now? Emma's 22. Sophie's 20. Emma dropped out of college because we couldn't afford tuition. Sophie's working 2 jobs to help with our rent, and Richard Sterling bought a boat last year. Mrs. Kendrick, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Get him. Make him pay for what he did to all of us. Over the next week, 11 more victims called me, each one with the same story, trusted Richard with their family's future, believed his excuses about market volatility, discovered too late that he'd stolen everything. James Patterson, the disabled veteran, he called from a VA facility where he lived because he couldn't afford private care anymore, despite a $4 million settlement that should have secured his future. I trusted him, James said, his words slightly slurred from the brain injury. He came to the hospital after I got hurt, said he'd take care of everything. I couldn't work anymore, couldn't think straight. He seemed so kind. How much did he take? All of it. 3.2 million. My disability settlement, my VA benefits accumulation, everything. I get $1,200 a month now. That's it. That's my whole life. I sat with my laptop open, listening to James, and pulled up Richard's property records. The Greenwich mansion, $6.5 million. The vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, $3.2 million. The Bentley, the Mercedes SUV, the classic Porsche he kept in a climate-controlled garage. Patricia's jewelry, the country club memberships, the private school tuition for cousins. I barely knew. All of it bought with stolen money, with James Patterson's disability settlement, with Barbara Kendrick's daughter's inheritance, with my father's legacy. The grand jury indicted Richard on 47 counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, elder abuse, theft from a disabled person. His bail was set at $5 million. He posted it within 24 hours. I later found out he'd mortgaged everything he owned to make bail, including properties bought with stolen money. The irony was almost funny. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later, but Richard's attorney tried every delay tactic in the book. Motions to dismiss, motions to suppress evidence, motions to sever counts, claims of prosecutorial misconduct, arguments about statute of limitations. Every single motion was denied. Catherine Morrison was relentless. She added a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse, brought in FBI agents who'd worked financial crimes, built a case so airtight that Richard's expensive defense attorney started making settlement overtures. My client is willing to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for asset forfeiture and restitution. Your client is going to plead guilty to every count, Catherine replied, and he's going to prison for a very long time. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the courtroom every single day, front row, so Richard would have to see me when he walked in, so he'd know exactly who had brought him down. The prosecution called 53 witnesses, forensic accountants who traced the money, FBI agents who'd investigated the fraud, victims who testified about what Richard's theft had cost them. Barbara Kendrick took the stand and described working 3 jobs while her daughters went without because the trust that should have supported them had been emptied by a man they'd trusted. James Patterson testified via video link, his words halting but powerful, about losing his independence and his dignity because the money meant to secure his medical care had vanished into Richard Sterling's bank account. My mother testified about watching me take out student loans while Richard drove luxury cars and never mentioned that my father's trust could have paid for college 10 times over. I testified last. Catherine walked me through the timeline. The $25 million trust, the expected growth, the systematic theft disguised as investments, the excessive fees, the self-dealing, all of it. Richard's attorney tried to shake me on cross-examination. Miss Sterling, isn't it true that you're a sophisticated investor who should have reviewed the trust statements years ago? I was 10 years old when my father died. I trusted my uncle because my father trusted him. That trust was misplaced. But you're a professional portfolio manager now. You understand that investments can fail. I understand that trustee self-dealing is illegal. I understand that using trust assets to capitalize your own business is fraud. I understand that my uncle spent 28 years stealing from his dead brother's daughter while pretending to care about my well-being. You're clearly emotional about this. I'm clearly competent to recognize embezzlement when I see it. Would you like me to walk through the forensic analysis again? I can explain exactly how he hid the theft. It'll take about 4 hours. The attorney sat down. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all 47 counts. Richard's face drained of color when the verdict was read. Patricia sobbed in the gallery. My cousins sat in shocked silence. I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow awareness that justice had been served, but nothing could give me back the 28 years of lies. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Walsh. She'd spent 30 years on the bench and had a reputation for harsh sentences in white-collar crime cases. Mr. Sterling, she began, looking at him over her reading glasses, you were appointed trustee of your niece's inheritance after your brother, her father, died tragically. You were given the sacred responsibility of protecting a child's financial future. Instead, you stole from her for 28 years. You stole from a disabled veteran. You stole from orphaned children. You betrayed every principle of fiduciary duty and basic human decency. Richard started to speak. His attorney touched his arm, but he shook him off. Your Honor, I made mistakes. I never intended. You never intended to get caught, Judge Walsh interrupted. You intended to steal. You did steal. $117 million from 55 families who trusted you. The only mistake you made was underestimating your niece's ability to recognize fraud when she saw it. She opened the sentencing order. Richard Sterling, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on the embezzlement charges, 7 years on the elder abuse charges, 5 years on theft from a disabled person, sentences to run consecutively, total 37 years. Patricia gasped. Richard went pale. You are further ordered to pay full restitution to all victims in the amount of $117 million. All assets, properties, vehicles, investment accounts, personal property will be liquidated and distributed to victims on a pro rata basis. You are permanently barred from serving as a trustee, financial advisor, or fiduciary in any capacity. The gavel came down. Richard was 67 years old. A 37-year sentence meant he'd die in prison. As the marshals led him away, he looked at me one last time. I didn't look away. The asset liquidation took 4 months. Everything Richard owned was sold at auction. The Greenwich mansion went for $6.2 million. The Martha's Vineyard house for $3.1 million. The cars, the jewelry, the art collection, even the furniture. Patricia filed for divorce and claimed she'd known nothing about the fraud. The investigators didn't believe her. She'd lived in houses and driven cars bought with stolen money, but they couldn't prove she'd participated in the embezzlement. She got to keep her personal belongings. Everything else went to the victims. My cousins cut off all contact with me, blamed me for destroying their father, for taking away their inheritance. I didn't try to explain that their inheritance had been stolen from other people. that every dollar they'd spent on private schools and luxury cars had been taken from families who'd lost everything. They didn't want to hear it. The restitution pool totaled $23.4 million after liquidating everything Richard owned. It wasn't close to the $117 million he'd stolen, but it was something. Barbara Kendrick's daughters each received $412,000, enough to finish college and start their lives over. James Patterson received $1.80 million, enough to move into assisted living with actual care instead of just subsisting on VA benefits. I received $8.7 million from the restitution pool, combined with the $8.2 million left in my original trust and the growth from legitimate investments. My total inheritance was approximately $19.4 million. Not the $80 million it should have been, but enough to honor my father's memory and secure my future the way he'd intended. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, betrayed by family, or wondered whether speaking up is worth the risk, I hope you'll subscribe to The Quiet Reckoning. This is where we tell the stories they don't want you to hear. Stories where documentation defeats corruption, where transparency wins over secrecy, and where ordinary professionals armed with nothing but the truth bring down systems built on lies. Hit that subscribe button because there are more reckonings coming, and trust me, they're just as satisfying as this one. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you discovered a family member was stealing your inheritance, would you report them or try to handle it privately? I read every single comment. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I received a call from the Connecticut General Assembly. Ms. Sterling, this is Representative Maria Santos. I chair the Committee on Probate and Fiduciary Law. Your case has exposed serious gaps in how we oversee trustees. We'd like your help drafting reform legislation. I met with the committee the following week. The reforms we proposed were comprehensive: mandatory annual audits for trusts over $1 million, independent review of all trustee fee increases, criminal background checks for professional trustees, automatic red flags for trustee self-dealing, beneficiary rights to request forensic audits at trustee expense if fraud is suspected. The bill passed unanimously. Governor signed it into law 6 months later. It was named the David Sterling Trust Protection Act. My father's legacy finally used the way he'd intended to protect families. I also started something else. Using part of my recovered inheritance, I established the Sterling Foundation for Fiduciary Accountability, a nonprofit that provides free forensic accounting services to beneficiaries who suspect trustee fraud but can't afford investigation costs. We helped 12 families in the first year, found fraud in 9 cases, recovered $8.4 million in stolen assets. Barbara Kendrick joined the board. So did James Patterson, who'd recovered enough to advocate for other disabled veterans facing financial exploitation. We weren't trying to replace the legal system. We were trying to give people the tools to recognize fraud before decades of theft destroyed their futures, the way Richard had destroyed mine. 1 year after Richard went to prison, I resigned from Whitmore Capital. My boss was shocked. Adriana, you're on track for partner. You manage $4 billion in assets. Why would you walk away? Because I know something about trust management now, I said, and I want to use that knowledge to protect people who can't protect themselves. I opened my own firm, Sterling Fiduciary Services. We don't manage trusts. We audit them. We review trustee decisions for red flags. We provide second opinions to beneficiaries who suspect something's wrong but can't prove it. My first client was a woman whose brother was trustee of their mother's estate. She suspected he was stealing but didn't have evidence. I reviewed 2 years of records and found $240,000 in fraudulent management fees and expenses that had nothing to do with estate administration. She filed suit. One got the money back plus damages. My second client was a man whose sister-in-law managed his disabled son's special needs trust. The trust value kept dropping despite market growth. I found she'd been borrowing money for her own expenses and covering it up with creative accounting. She was removed as trustee, ordered to repay $180,000, and permanently barred from managing trusts. By the end of year one, Sterling Fiduciary Services had helped 43 clients recover $4.2 million in stolen assets. I wasn't getting rich. I charged sliding scale fees based on what clients could afford, but I was sleeping better than I had in years. Because I'd learned something through all of this. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about accountability. It's about taking the pain someone caused you and transforming it into protection for everyone who comes after. Richard Sterling stole from me for 28 years. He stole from 55 families. He betrayed his dead brother's trust and exploited a child's grief. But because I refused to stay silent, because I used my professional expertise to expose him, because I documented every fraudulent transaction and brought it into the light, he can never hurt anyone again. 37 years in prison, permanent ban from financial services, state law reform to prevent future trustee fraud, a foundation helping victims, a company protecting beneficiaries. That's the quiet reckoning. Not screaming, not revenge fantasies, not violence, just documentation, evidence, the slow, patient work of building a case so airtight that even expensive lawyers can't defend against it. Richard thought I wouldn't notice the theft because I was just his niece, just the little girl he'd given away at her wedding, just someone who trusted family. He was wrong. I noticed because I'm a professional portfolio manager who knows exactly what investment growth looks like. I proved it because I documented everything and brought in experts who couldn't be intimidated. I won because I refused to let family loyalty shield him from accountability. 2 years after Richard went to prison, I visited my father's grave for the first time since the trial. I'd avoided it during the investigation, couldn't face the stone with his name while knowing his brother had betrayed his dying wish. But now, with justice served and reforms in place and families protected, I could finally stand there without rage overwhelming the grief. I got him, Dad, I said quietly, my fingers tracing the dates carved in granite. I got the money back. Not all of it, but enough, and I made sure he can't hurt anyone else. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of cut grass and earth. I know you trusted him. I know you thought family meant something. But I learned that trust has to be earned, not assumed. And when someone betrays it, even family, especially family, they have to face consequences. I placed flowers on the grave, white lilies, his favorite. I'm using the money the way you wanted. Building a future, helping people, making sure your legacy means something beyond just dollars in an account. I stayed for a while watching the sun set behind the cemetery gates, feeling something settle that had been restless for 28 years. My father had trusted the wrong person, but he'd raised the right daughter, someone who knew how to follow the money, who understood that silence protects abusers, who had the courage to stand in a courtroom and call her own uncle a thief. The quiet reckoning isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's a woman in her 30s asking for trust documentation and recognizing fraud in the numbers. Sometimes it's refusing to accept market losses as explanation for missing millions. Sometimes it's sitting in a conference room for 72 hours, building a forensic case that can't be denied. Sometimes it's watching the person who stole from you get led away in handcuffs and feeling nothing but cold satisfaction that the truth finally won. Richard Sterling thought he could steal from a child and hide it behind family loyalty and complex financial structures. He was wrong, because the child grew up, became an expert in exactly the field he was exploiting, built a career on recognizing patterns he thought were hidden. And when she finally looked at her inheritance with professional eyes instead of trusting eyes, she saw every lie he'd ever told. That's the power of expertise, the power of documentation, the power of refusing to stay silent when something doesn't add up. I didn't destroy Richard Sterling out of revenge. I destroyed him because he was a thief who'd stolen $117 million from 55 families, and someone had to stop him. I just happened to be the one with the skills to prove it. The quiet reckoning is patient, methodical, built on evidence instead of anger. But it's also inevitable because eventually someone will notice the pattern. Someone will ask the questions. Someone will refuse to accept easy answers. And when that someone has a financial background, professional connections, and 28 years of stolen time fueling their determination, the reckoning isn't quiet anymore. It's deafening.